My sister stole $2,000 and accused me of being a thief. My parents kicked me out without listening. But a year and a half later, police arrested my sister for $1 million fraud, and now my parents lost their house begging for my help. What I told them broke them completely. I'm 28 years old. I work at a hardware store, and I also have my own little online shop that's starting to take off. And I need to tell this story because what my family did to me like a year and a half ago almost destroyed me completely. But in the end, I ended up better than ever while they're drowning in their own shit. And honestly, I feel incredible satisfaction every time I think about it. I guess I should start at the beginning. When my business went to hell because of COVID and all that nightmare we all lived through in 2020. Look, I was always the middle child, not the oldest or the baby, just the one who was there. My sister, Nicole, was always the family star. Literally everything she did was perfect, according to my parents. She got good grades. She married Christopher, who came from a family with money. She supposedly had a super successful business selling beauty products and fashion stuff, and my parents adored her. She was their pride. I, on the other hand, was always more normal, let's say. I studied business administration at a state university. Nothing fancy. I worked at some companies and then decided to launch my own handmade accessories business, like artisan jewelry and things like that. It wasn't anything special, but I liked it. It gave me enough to live on. And I was proud of having built it myself. Everything was going relatively well until the pandemic hit, and basically took my business down with it. Sales dropped to zero because nobody was buying anything that wasn't food or toilet paper. I had to close my small shop because I couldn't pay rent. I lost all my savings trying to stay afloat. And by mid-2020, I was basically broke. I lived off my credit cards for a while, then from some freelance jobs I found online, but things got worse and worse. By January 2021, I had almost nothing left. I was behind on my apartment payment, I was eating once a day to save money, and I literally saw no way out. That's when I did what I swore I'd never do. I called my parents to ask them for help. The call was horrible. Having to admit that I had failed, that I needed money, that I couldn't do it alone. My mother answered, and when I explained the situation, there was a long silence. Super awkward. And then she told me to get in touch with Nicole because she knew about business and could help me better. I didn't want to, honestly, because Nicole and I were never close. She always treated me like I was less than her. But I was desperate, like really desperate. So I called her. And that's where everything went to shit. Although at the time I thought it was my salvation. Nicole offered me a deal that sounded too good to be true. And guess what? It was. She told me she would lend me money to get out of my most urgent debts, that I could move back to my parents' house to save on rent. They had a big house with an extra room, and that I could work for her in her business while I recovered. It sounded perfect. Right? My salvation. I said yes immediately, packed my things, left my apartment, and moved back to my hometown around February 2021. I was 26 years old and moving back in with my parents like a failure, but I thought it was temporary, that in a few months I'd be on my feet again. The first few days were weird, but manageable. My parents treated me with that mix of pity and disappointment that makes you feel like garbage. But well, I had a roof and food. Nicole transferred me like $3,000 to pay my most urgent debts, and I signed a paper where I committed to paying her back with work, like an informal contract. I started working in her business, which was supposedly selling high-end beauty products, Korean skincare, European makeup, that kind of stuff. She had an office in her house, a little warehouse full of boxes, and everything seemed legit. I was in charge of packing orders, updating inventory, responding to customer messages. Basically, I was her assistant and warehouse employee all in one. But there were weird things from the beginning. Nicole was super controlling about everything. She wouldn't let me see the accounting books or supplier invoices. She told me my job was only operational, that she handled the strategic part of the business. I also noticed that some products didn't have labels stuck on properly, or that the packaging looked kind of different from the originals. But when I asked her, she'd tell me they were versions for distributors or something like that. And I didn't know anything about that world, so I believed her. I worked like 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and Nicole kept track of how much I owed her for the hours, deducting the loan. Basically, I was working for her almost for free while living at my parents' house, feeling like I was a burden. It went on like that for about 4 months, from February to May 2021, and I was exhausted, but I thought at least I was paying off my debt and saving some money. I had a bank account with like $2,000 that I had managed to save from some extra payments Nicole gave me when there was a lot of work, and I was planning to be able to move out again by the end of the year, start over. My parents kept treating me like a disappointment. Nicole treated me like her inferior employee, but I put up with it because I needed to get out of there. And then came the day that changed everything. It was a Friday in June. I remember the exact date because it was the worst fucking day of my life. June 11, 2021. I went to check my bank account to see how much I had saved, and the screen showed me a balance of zero. Exactly zero. I stood there staring at my phone like an idiot, thinking it was a bank error. But when I checked the transaction history, I saw that all my money had been transferred to another account 2 days earlier, on Wednesday. It hadn't been me, obviously, but the transfer had been made from my account. I went into total panic mode, called the bank, and they told me the transfer had been authorized with my security information, that I would have to do an investigation, but it would take weeks. I ran to find my parents who were in the living room watching TV. I explained what had happened, that someone had stolen my money, that I needed help. My father looked at me with that expression that means, "What problem now?" And my mother just sighed. But before they could say anything, Nicole appeared from the kitchen. He didn't know she was there, and said, with a super serious and worried voice, "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about Lily." I looked at her without understanding, and she continued, "I've been checking my accounts because I was missing money, and I discovered something very serious." What happened next was like a horror movie. Nicole pulled out her laptop and showed my parents some supposed bank statements where there were transfers from her business accounts to an account that, according to her, was mine. She also had screenshots of text, conversations where supposedly I asked her for money and then denied it, and she even had a document that, according to her, I had signed acknowledging that I owed her like $20,000 and that I had taken money from the business cash box without permission. I was paralyzed, literally couldn't even speak, because all of that was a lie, completely false. I had never seen those documents in my life. I tried to explain to them that it was a lie, that Nicole was lying, that I had never taken anything, but my parents had already decided who to believe. My father got up from the couch and yelled at me. And when I say yelled, I mean, I had never heard him that furious in my entire life. He told me I was a thief, ungrateful, that they had given me a roof and food and I had stolen from my own sister. My mother was crying and saying how could I have done that to Nicole after she had helped me, that I was a disgrace to the family. Nicole was standing there with a victim face, saying it hurt her to have to expose this, but she couldn't allow me to keep stealing. I tried to defend myself. I told them to check my account, to see that I had also been robbed, that it was all a setup, but my father didn't want to hear anything. He told me I had exactly 30 minutes to pack my things and get out of his house, that he didn't want to see me again, that I was no longer his daughter. 30 minutes. I went up to my room shaking. I couldn't even cry from the shock. I stuffed what I could into 2 suitcases, my clothes, some personal things, and went downstairs. My mother was in her room and didn't even come out to say goodbye. My father was at the door with his arms crossed, and when I walked past him, he said to me, "You're a disgrace. Don't contact us again." Nicole watched me leave from the living room window, and I swear I saw a smile on her face. A fucking smile. I went out to the street with my 2 suitcases, not knowing what to do. Without money, without work, without family, without anything. I walked like 3 blocks and sat down at a bus stop, and that's when I completely broke down. I cried like I had never cried in my life. I couldn't believe what had happened. That my own sister had set me up. That my parents had believed her without even listening to me. That I was literally on the street. I called a couple of friends I had in town, but none answered. It was Friday night and they were probably busy. I ended up going to a cheap motel with what little I had in my wallet, like $50 in cash, and I spent the whole night awake trying to understand what the hell had happened. The next few months were the hardest of my life, like really dark. I lived in that motel for about 2 weeks until I ran out of money, then I moved to a cheaper one where you basically only had a bed and a shared bathroom. I looked for work desperately. I applied to everything I found, but without references and without being able to put my family as a contact, it was difficult. I finally got a job cleaning houses. I earned like $10 an hour. I worked when there was work, and it was barely enough for the room and some food. I lost like 10 kilos because I ate once a day, sometimes just bread and whatever was cheapest. I didn't have a cell phone because I couldn't pay for the plan. I used Wi-Fi from coffee shops to look for work. It was horrible. And the whole time I thought about Nicole and my parents, and I felt a mix of rage and sadness that almost consumed me. But something changed in me during that time. I decided I wasn't going to let them destroy me, that I was going to get ahead even if it cost me everything. I kept looking for better jobs, and in August, about 2 months after they kicked me out, I got a job at a local bakery. The owner was an older man, Don Roberto, like in his 60s, who gave me a chance even though I didn't have many references. It paid a little better, $11 an hour, and he gave me free food from what was left over at the end of the day. Don Roberto was good people. He taught me how to make bread, cakes, basic pastry stuff, and I started to get the rhythm. With that job, I was able to move to a slightly better room in a house where they rented rooms, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I worked at the bakery for about 6 months, from August 2021 to February 2022, and Don Roberto taught me a lot, not just about baking, but about life. You know, he advised me. He listened when I needed to talk. I told him everything that had happened with my family, and he told me something I never forgot. The best revenge is to live well and be successful. Show them they don't need you more than you need them. Those words stuck with me. In February, I got a better job at a hardware store that paid $15 an hour, had fixed hours, and even benefits. The owner, Mike, needed someone who knew about inventory and customer service, and I already had experience from my old business. So, I fit perfectly. With the job at the hardware store, my life started to really stabilize. I was able to move to a small but decent apartment. A tiny studio, but it was mine. I started saving again, little by little, and most importantly, I started rebuilding my business, but in a different way, this time online, selling through Etsy and social media. I used my days off to make jewelry, accessories, and little by little, I built up clientele. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was mine, and nobody could take it from me. By mid-2022, I was in a completely different place than a year before. I had stable work, my small business growing, and some peace of mind. During all that time, I didn't hear anything from my family. They didn't try to contact me. I didn't try to contact them. It was like we all agreed that I no longer existed for them. It hurt, obviously, but I also got used to it. I focused on myself and on getting ahead. I made new friends. I started therapy with the psychologist who charged cheap because she knew I didn't have much money, and slowly I healed. I still thought about Nicole and what she did to me, and the anger was still there. But I learned to channel it into being better, into proving to them they were wrong. And then, in October 2022, like a year and a half after they kicked me out, I received a message I didn't expect. It was from Christopher, Nicole's husband. We had no contact. Basically, we hadn't talked since everything happened. And the message said something like, "Lily, I need to talk to you urgently. Please call me. It's important." I stood there staring at the message, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, but curiosity won. I called him, and what he told me was simply incredible. In the good sense for me, turns out Nicole's whole business was a total sham. Christopher explained to me, with a voice that sounded destroyed, that Nicole had been selling counterfeit products all this time. The Korean skincare, the European makeup, it was all fake, cheap copies that she bought from shady suppliers and resold as if they were originals. That's why she wouldn't let me see the invoices or suppliers, because it was all illegal. And not only that, she had been using my parents' money to maintain the facade of success. She asked them for like an investment of $50,000 years ago, telling them she would expand the business, but she used that money to pay debts and buy things for herself. New cars, expensive clothes, trips, all to pretend she was doing super well. But it all came crashing down when several customers realized the products were fake and reported her. There was an investigation. They found she had sold counterfeit products worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now she was facing criminal charges for fraud and selling counterfeit merchandise. The authorities froze all her accounts, including the accounts where she had my parents' money, and now Nicole was basically bankrupt waiting for trial. Christopher told me he didn't know anything about this, that Nicole kept it secret, and now he was also screwed because they were married and shared financial responsibilities. He asked me if I could help them, if I could lend them money or talk to my parents so they wouldn't sue her for the money she had stolen from them. I stayed silent for several seconds because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman had ruined my life, had left me on the street, had taken my family away from me, and now her husband was asking me for help. I asked him directly if Nicole knew he was calling me, and he said no, that Nicole was so deep in depression she didn't want to talk to anyone, but that he was desperate. He also told me something that confirmed what I suspected, that Nicole had stolen my money from the bank account and had fabricated all the evidence to frame me, that it had all been a plan to cover herself because she already knew things were. I'm going to get bad with her business. I told Christopher I was very sorry for him, but I wasn't going to help at all, that Nicole had made her bed and now had to lie in it, and that my parents would have to deal with the consequences of having believed the wrong daughter. I hung up the phone and sat on my couch processing everything. I felt a mix of emotions, anger obviously, but also something like satisfaction, justice, you know what I mean? It wasn't that I did something to get revenge, karma just did its job. 2 weeks later, my mother called me. It was the first time I heard her voice in a year and a half. She was crying, saying they had made a terrible mistake, that now they knew the truth about Nicole, that I was right, that please forgive them and help them. She told me they were going to lose their house because they had put the house up as collateral for one of the loans they gave Nicole, that they had no money, that Nicole was probably going to prison, that they were desperate. I listened to her in silence, and when she finished, I said, "Mom, when I needed help, you called me a thief and threw me out on the street without listening to my side. Now that you need help, you call me. It doesn't work that way." And I hung up. I'm not going to lie. After hanging up, I felt bad for a moment, because she's my mother. But then I remembered that day in June, when they threw me out without mercy, when my father told me I was a disgrace, when Nicole smiled watching me leave, and it passed. I blocked my parents' numbers and Christopher's. I didn't want to know more about them. Nicole ended up being formally charged with fraud and selling counterfeit products, and according to what I heard from people in town, she got like 3 years in prison and a giant fine. My parents lost all the money they had given her and had to sell their house to pay debts. They moved to a small apartment. Christopher divorced Nicole while she was in prison. Their entire perfect world collapsed. Meanwhile, I moved forward with my life. In March 2023, I applied for a small business grant, a government program for entrepreneurs who had overcome adversity, and I got it. $5,000 to invest in my online business. I used that money to buy better materials, equipment, and do marketing on social media. My Etsy store started to really grow. Every month I sold more, and by the end of 2023, I was earning more with my business than at the hardware store. I still work at the hardware store because I like it. Mike is a good boss and it gives me stability, but my business is my pride. About 2 months ago, my father tried to contact me again through a cousin. He told my cousin to please tell me they wanted to see me, that they were sorry, that I was their daughter and they wanted to fix things. My cousin gave me the message, and I told him to tell them this exactly, that I'm a better person and have a better life without them, that I don't need their forgiveness and their regret, and that I hope every day they remember they chose to believe the daughter who scammed them instead of the daughter who was telling the truth. Harsh, I know, but it's what I feel. Last week, I updated my online store with a new product line and sold everything in 2 days. I made like $2,000 in one weekend. I moved to a better apartment, 1 bedroom, with a small office where I work on my jewelry. I have friends who support me, a life I built from scratch, and a peace of mind I didn't have before. When I see old photos of my family, I no longer feel that sharp sadness I felt before. I just feel indifference, like they're strangers. And in a way, they are. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive Nicole or my parents. Probably not. But it doesn't matter anymore. They have to live with the consequences of their decisions, just like I lived with mine. The difference is that I got ahead, and they're still sunk in the mess they created. And that, I guess, is all the justice I need.